Can you toss me that thing? No. That thing over there. No. That thing over there. This is what happens when you don't give enough details. Want your descriptions to pop off the page? Stick around and find out how. Now, I just gotta figure out what to do with these things. Oh, I know. Yeah, that thing. No, not now! Welcome to Word Wizards, a series where you'll discover the magic of writing. I'm Marty Chan, a kids author, playwright, and word wizard. I'm going to share with you my tips on how to become a better writer. Now, if you're a creative person, the great thing is you can take, anything and turn it into a story. All you have to do is apply your imagination, bend things into shape. You might have to twist them or tie them off, but eventually you'll have a story that people will want to read from the beginning to the middle to the end. Unfortunately, sometimes in our rush to get the story down, we tend to forget a few details here and there. And when you forget to put details in a story, what it does is it cuts your story in half, or it cuts your story into different pieces. And unfortunately, then what happens is somebody could read the beginning of the story, but they can't get anywhere closer to the next part of the story because there's that gap. Now, if you're an experienced writer, you're not going to panic. You know how to fill in that gap and stitch these two separate parts together. All you need to do is add those details back in. And so what you're going to have to do is figure out what details or what words you're going to use to fill in the gap. And you might have to do a little trimming. You might have to do a little bit of polishing. But when you put everything together, then your story connects just like this. And people will be able to follow from the beginning to the middle and then to the end. Now, I'm going to show you how to do that. Well, I'm not going to show you how to do this, but I'm going to share with you my tips on how you can add details to make your story seem complete. Before I share with you my tips on becoming better writers, let me tell you a story, a scenario that some of you might be familiar with. You're sitting in class. Your teacher gives you an assignment to write a story. And it's one of these magic days where instantly you know what story you want to write. You can picture the characters, you can see the setting, you know every single plot twist that's going to happen in the story. You grab a piece of paper and a pencil and you furiously write down every single idea that you have in your brain. Now, in record time, you finish the story and you write the end at the bottom. You proudly march to your teacher's desk, show her your story, and ask for her feedback. And you watch as your teacher goes over your story. You're thinking she's going to find it brilliant, amazing. She might even read it aloud in class as an example of what a great story should be. When your teacher finishes, she smiles at you and says, "That's a pretty good story, but it needs more details." You're shocked. You're surprised. You're a little upset that she didn't see how brilliant your writing was. And you ask, "Are you sure that I need more details?" And she says, "Yes, I can't picture everything that you want in the story. Your story definitely needs more details." You grab your story from the teacher, stomp to your desk, plop down in your seat, you pull out an eraser and you start erasing everything that you wrote in the story. Your teacher looks over and says, "I said your story's pretty good. You don't have to erase anything, just add details." And you're like, "Ugh." You pick up your pencil and you start tracing over the words you had just tried to rub out. And while you're doing it, you're trying to add the details that your teacher asked for. The girl walked into the kitchen. No. The blonde girl walked into the kitchen. No, the blonde girl walked noisily into the kitchen. No, the blonde girl walked noisily into the kitchen that had a sink, a table, and a refrigerator. Why didn't I double space my writing? You put the pencil down, you start thinking, why do I have to do this? I know what the girl looks like in my story, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows what a kitchen looks like. I can just explain the things that people don't see. Then you hear the teacher tell another student, your story's pretty good, but it needs more details. Wait a minute, that's the exact same thing she told you. And you start to think that maybe you didn't need to add details. Your teacher's just punishing the class because somebody farted when the principal came in last week. Now let me set the record straight. Your teacher is not trying to punish you. Details in stories do matter. In fact, if you think about a story as a movie that plays out in your brain, you've got to be able to get that same movie playing in your reader's brain. Now, the thing about your imagination is when you come up with your ideas, they instantly form. They have all the details you need. You know what the character looks like, you know what the setting looks like. But you've got to be able to get those details down on the page. In your mind, if you wanted to add details, all you have to do is make a change. But when you're writing, you actually have to write those things out. And if you're playing around with setting, you also have to come up with those details. And if you need a different setting, you just change it. However, when you're writing, you got to get that down on the page. If you don't give us those details, we can't see the movie that's in your mind. We get blank spaces. And if we get those blank spaces, a lot of us will give up and say, that's not a really good story, and we'll go find another story. Or you'll get the rare reader who will look at the blank space and then try to fill it in with their own details, and that will make a completely different story with completely different characters. For example, let's say you wanted to write a superhero story, and you come up with this great heroic character. She's got muscles on top of muscles. She can fly across the world in the blink of an eye, and she has a fiery red cape to match her glowing red hair. If you don't give us those details of your superhero, we might wind up picturing a superhero that looks like. Now, if that's your idea of the superhero, then that's fine. But if you had a different idea of what your hero was supposed to look like, that's why you need to have details. Those details will create the picture that was floating in your brain and then plug them into your reader's brains. All right, so hopefully I convinced you that details matter. Your next question is, where can I find these details that I can put into my stories? Marty Chan, do you have a secret list of details that authors use? Well, I do have a list, but that list isn't really going to help you because the list of details that I use are very particular to what I do as a writer, because I like to write funny and scary stuff. And if I gave you my master list of words, we'd have like a clone army of writers coming up with the same details for their stories. So unfortunately, I can't give you that list, but you can make your own. In fact, it's important for you to make your own list because when you come up with your particular words or details, it helps to shape your writer's voice. And oftentimes, that's what readers love about writers, is how they tell the story, how they describe their setting and their characters. So you've got to come up with a list that works best for you. Now, I'm not going to leave you hanging. I'm going to give you some tips on where you can find those words. Read as many books as you can get your hands on, especially books in the genre that you want to write. When you're looking at those books, you may come across some cool descriptions. Now, you're not going to plagiarize, you're not going to copy those descriptions, but you're going to play around and see if you can top that description. And the most important book that you can have at hand is the thesaurus. The thesaurus gives you all sorts of words that are synonyms to words that you might normally use. So you could find different words for how somebody walks or how somebody runs. Go through that thesaurus when you see words that you want to use, but find different ways of expressing them, and that will give you your list. Now, it's going to take a little time to build that list, and I want to give you some tips that can help you as you're compiling or pulling together all those words and details you want to use in your stories. One tip that I'm going to give you is this. I know your teacher might say, give me some adjectives or adverbs. Those are perfectly fine, but they're kind of like the finishing touches that you put on a wall. What you need is that wall first. And that wall is represented by action words, verbs. If you have your character doing something, it's going to instantly create a picture in the reader's minds. And that's exactly what you're trying to do. Create instant pictures for the reader. So for example, if you had Craig was mad when he lost the video game for the 17th time, that's okay as a description, but if we add some verbs in, it kind of lifts it off the page. So it could be Craig hurled the game controller at the TV, which blinked game over. Then he stormed out of the living room. By using things like hurled and stormed, it creates an instant picture, and that action helps us picture exactly what you want us to see. Now, keep in mind, with an action, you can apply it also to the description of setting and characters. If you have a character do something that draws the reader's attention to what the setting looks like or what the character looks like, it'll help us picture things a lot better than if you just gave us a list. I call it my grocery list of details, where you actually stop the story to describe what a character looks like or what a setting looks like. If you have a character in a setting, have them do something that brings our attention to what the setting looks like. For example, if I wanted to describe a beautiful mountain lake, I might have somebody canoeing across the lake, the Emerald Lake, and the mountains would be reflected on the glassy surface of the water. The canoe would cut through the frigid water. The canoer might be pushing or paddling through that pristine water. Or maybe the canoer starts to tug at their stinky orange life jacket, and it reeks of the 17,000 other people who wore the life jacket before them. By having the character do something that draws our attention to aspects of the setting or characteristics of the person, we get a sense of what things look like, but the story seems like it's moving forward. So try that out. Use some action words and some character actions that bring our attention to what the details are in your story. I want you to try to put all of this into action. I like to finish my videos off with a story prompt or a writing prompt where you get to put everything I talked about into action. So here's my story prompt for all of you. I want you to write a story, but I want you to pick a setting, one that you've been to. Could be your house, could be your school, could be someplace you went on vacation. Someplace where you're familiar with the surroundings and you can borrow the details and put them into your story. Now for me, if I wanted to write a story set someplace, I'd probably pick the mountains in Banff, because I think about those beautiful Rocky Mountains, walking up trails in mid the forest. Maybe as I'm climbing a trail, I might come across Sasquatch. So if you pick something that's familiar to you, you can borrow some of those details and put them into your story. So try to apply the tips I talked about to your story starter. Now, the great thing is when you're describing your setting, your characters, don't feel like you have to start from scratch. If you can keep your eyes and ears open, whatever you see or hear or experience in the world, well, guess what? Those are details you can use to describe the characters and setting in your story. Let me show you what I mean with one last thing. So right over here, this white rope represents my life experiences, the collection of all my observations that I can actually raid and use for the stories I want to write. And this red rope represents all the stories I'm trying to write. So if I'm writing and I need to describe something, I just put my life experiences together with my story, and I'll always have something that I'll be able to add to the story. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was a kid, my elementary school was this ancient building built back in the 1800s. It was 4 stories tall and made out of brick. And it had so many windows in them that it looked like this multi-eyed monster that stared at every student as they made their way to the school. Now, you see that knot in the rope? That knot represents my memory of my old school. When I sat down to work on my novel, Keepers of the Vault, it was all about a creepy, haunted school. And so when I was trying to figure out how to describe that building, what I did was I took my life experiences and I started thinking about what I could do to describe my school. And I thought, I will use that creepy school that I went to and use that as the creepy school in the story. So I took something from my life right over here and I popped it into my story right over here. Now, here's the thing. When you take something from your life and you put it into your story, sometimes it looks a little rough, right? That white knot and the red rope, it kind of stands out. So what you need to do is you have to smooth things out a little bit. And so you have to go over your work and revise. And you might have to add some details, or you might have to change some details in order to make things fit. And then you go over your work again and again, and you try to polish it and smooth it out until it's now just one complete part of your story. That's what happens when you apply your word wizardry. You can make your story smooth and complete, just like this. All right, I hope those tips come in handy. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.